Hello all, I'm Kel Kidman. Welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today, Amy Coney Barrett just got confirmed to the Supreme Court. That's real fun. What I want to talk about, rather than the actual Justice Barrett herself, or a lot of the reactions surrounding her specifically, I want to talk about one of the things that has annoyed me about the conservative thing with regard to this. And that is, it annoys me to no end that we call it filling a vacancy, because that's not really what we're doing. When it comes to the court, there are no set seats for the court in the Constitution. It isn't 9, all right, like everyone would have you believe. Essentially, what happened over the past few months was, or I guess it's just a month, is that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and then there were 8 seats on the court, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was no longer on the court, which means that there was only 8 seats. There were only 8 people on the court. Putting Amy Coney Barrett on the court raised that number to 9. Now, the reason we call it filling a vacancy is because the reason we nominated Amy Coney Barrett in the first place was to fill the seat. But I would argue against that sort of rhetoric, and I think I've made my position on the judiciary fairly clear in the second video I actually put up on this channel. But just to be perfectly clear for everyone who hasn't seen that video necessarily, I believe the court needs to be put in check more often by the legislature and the executive. I believe that impeachment, for instance, it should be one of the primary uses. It should be used against the court much more often than it actually is. And I believe this because the court has obviously, in my view, overdone its power, and thus eliminated its reason for being, at least in its current state. Read Federalist 78 if you want a more cogent and thorough explanation on that point. Anyway, on to the next story. We have Biden expressing openness to rotating justices off the Supreme Court. Now, this is interesting because this comes off of Joe Biden talking about a commission on making the judiciary less political. And I don't know really how this is going to work. I don't know if there's actually a way to do that in the Constitution. I don't know. So essentially what the proposal is that we should be moving people on and off the Supreme Court in essentially terms. It would be a form of term limits. Not entirely. I think it's kind of silly because I think it's a way of solving a problem which already has a solution because you don't want to use the actual solution itself. So that's my problem with it. A lot of this is also that I don't like the idea of making commissions on these sorts of things because, honestly, a lot of these things are really well decided within the Constitution itself. They have ways of preventing these things or dealing with these sorts of scenarios, and it's just not used as much as it really should be. So once again, I go back to we should be impeaching judges more often, Roberts specifically. Okay, I hate Roberts. Roberts is the worst, as I think I've made myself fairly clear on. Yeah, but anyway, on to a different topic. Protests have erupted in Philly because a cop killed a guy with a knife. Yeah, they're not even really pretending at this point because I'm not sure there was any, confusion even this time whether the guy was armed or not. It was just a guy with a knife who got killed by a cop. I don't really see the problem here, but people rioted and 30 people got injured. A cop got ran over, which is fun, I guess. It's crazy. Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, a lot of these, I don't think this is really going to help them, help them in Philadelphia. More riots is never a good idea. And you have this going on at the same time Biden has called a lid essentially on the entire campaign, the entire rest of the campaign, which is completely ridiculous. But when you take into account the fact that it is a response to certain more revelations on the Hunter Biden stuff, and specifically, I'm not going to talk about the illicit stuff, the less vicious, lewd things, because simply I don't care, all right? I mean, some of them do have things to do with Biden and can lead to me saying, or people saying, he's not a good father, which I think is fairly well evidenced at this point. But what I want to talk about instead is the leaks that came out from the Ukrainian government. And the Ukrainian government sent out a huge press release, press conference. It's super long. It's like an hour. And here's the thing. I'm not going to play it here. Reason being that if I did, I would be banned. But from YouTube, at least. I wouldn't be banned from BitChute. You can find it at BitChute. I linked it in the description. It's worth a watch. There's a lot of stuff there, and it pretty much just proves what the original narrative of the Biden story was, and that is he was trying to get the Ukrainian prosecutor fired for the Hunter Biden dealings, and with John Kerry added into the mix, which shouldn't be surprising to anyone who really knows anything about John Kerry, but that's beside the point. Yeah, this is official Ukrainian government material that's being released. They're releasing phone conversations and things like that. Very interesting, but a very, very long video. You know, and I won't get into all the details here. Essentially, just understand the original allegations against Biden are essentially confirmed true at this point. He was trying to fire the Ukrainian prosecutor so that he could do his corrupt deal, so that Hunter, his son, could do his corrupt dealings with Burisma in Ukraine. That was the whole point, apparently. That's what it seems to be at this point, and this is what you should focus on, by the way. The illicit, the lewd stuff, while it is it's somewhat interesting and shows a lot of other things about the Biden family, it doesn't hurt Joe Biden as much as showing that he had a direct influence in the corrupt dealings of his son. You need to really pay attention and always focus on Joe Biden. If you're going to make these sorts of arguments, you need to focus on Joe Biden. You need to always bring it back to Joe Biden. Make sure you have a direct connection. All right, it can't be some indirect. Oh, this might be bad. It might show this or that. No, you need to say Joe Biden did this. Joe Biden did this to help his son. Joe Biden did this to get pressure off his back in Ukraine. You know, Joe Biden did this to influence China to help Hunter or whatever. That's what you need to focus on. You can't focus on all of these sorts of outlying issues with regard to Hunter and stuff, because that's not going to work, okay? Anyway, on to our next story. A U.S. airstrike in Syria recently happened. It wiped out 7 al-Qaeda leaders. Now, to preface my positions on foreign policy, I'm not anti-war. I'm not particularly pro-war either. I think that the way Trump's doing it is pretty good, actually. You know, not having any new wars is nice, though I wouldn't be against a war with China. You know, that's my compromise with the anti-war people. Is like I'll be okay with us ending every single war in the Middle East, full stop. You know, taking literally everyone out, even the people who are there just to keep stability for the governments that we've put in, if we can go to war with China. That's my position. But anyway, on to this. I think these sorts of strikes are good. And the reason I think they're good is because they're very targeted. They're very well done most of the time. You know, Trump has been very, not timid, but controlled in his airstrikes. You see with the Soleimani kill where there was no collateral damage. And it seems to be the same here. I don't see where there's any sort of collateral damage other than the al-Qaeda leaders, which is really good. And I don't think anyone's going to go to war over these people. I mean, a lot of these countries know that if they end up going to war with the U.S., they're going to end up, you know, they're going to end up destroyed with their entire apparatus utterly decimated. So they don't. These governments, particularly like Iran and the like, are not interested in going to war with the U.S. At least not at this point, because they know they wouldn't win. They have no chance. And that's essentially my position on the war stuff. But anyway, on to our last story. We have Bill Gates complaining that Trump is not just listening to the fearmongers. He rails against Dr. Scott Atlas, saying he's a pseudo-expert, which, I mean, if we wanted to define pseudo-expert in a nominal way, or in a normal way, every expert who claims to be such would be a pseudo-expert, because by the definition of expert, as it knows everything about a given subject. That is not true of anyone. So I fail to see how this delineates between anyone, particularly people like Fauci who have not seen a patient in years, decades at this point. He's a career bureaucrat, and I don't see why so many people defend career bureaucrats, specifically recently. I mean, a lot of these people are, if not specifically corrupt themselves, at least participate in corruption to the extent that they want to keep their job for as long as possible. The whole point of why you would go into governance at all, or not governance, why you go into the bureaucracy at all, is because you want to have that sort of a safety net around your job. That's the whole point, or at least that's how I see it. And that's, you know, I get annoyed when people talk like, oh, we need to listen to, especially when it's people like Dr. Fauci, who has specifically insulted the American people for not inherently believing in authority. I mean, it's been amazing to me how many have just discarded the natural American instinct of screw the authority over the past few years. I mean, you've seen it a lot all over the place, particularly people who claim to be punk or other such anti-authority types. Very few of them clearly ever were. I mean, as we claim that, say Jack Black claims that, oh, Joe Biden's totally punk rock, you know, the guy who's supported by all the corporations and all of these establishment figures is the punk rock one. Now, I'm not inherently anti-establishment. I think establishment in favor of one. That's my opinion. My opinion is, well, I would be pro the establishment if the establishment was, you know, libertarian governance, federalism, that sort of thing. That's what I would think would be a reasonable establishment. But that's not what our establishment is at this point, which makes me, to a certain extent, anti-establishment. But only, you know, in that context. That's my... whereas other people would be anti-establishment in almost any circumstances. You know, I'm just not that type of person. But anyway, I think that's all. Subscribe for more. I'm Kel Kidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm out.